Joseph Sobran, senior editor of National Review and nationally syndicated columnist. Jonathan Alter, writing in Newsweek a couple of weeks ago, led off a paragraph by saying, by the most charitable standards, Sobran seems guilty of a muddle-minded desire to be provocative at any cost. What was he talking about, and do you agree with him?
Oh, no, I don't agree. He was talking about some columns I wrote about Jewish issues, especially Israel. And first of all, I'm not muddle-minded, and second, I don't try to be provocative. I guess my views are provocative because they're sort of, I don't know, they're sort of semi-taboo, although they're quite normal as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I think most people do agree with them if you give people a chance to talk about them freely. But he wrote the usual article trying to, by his own admission, reinforce taboos on these subjects.
Tell us about, start from scratch, if you would. This has been going on for how long, and when did it start?
Well, I criticize all kinds of special interest lobbies, as most conservatives do. The difference is that I've taken on several ethnic lobbies in ways others don't like to, the black and Jewish ones in particular. Also the gay ones and the feminist ones. Now, as soon as you start doing that, you open yourself up to a kind of ad hominem argument that's still legitimate for some reason. You're called an anti-Semite, or you're called a racist, or a homophobe, or a male chauvinist, or sexist. They have all these, kind of cuss words that are used for anyone who criticizes the lobby. So it's presumed, I mean, they try to plant the assumption that because you criticize the lobby, you're hostile to the people. So if you criticize the demands of the black lobby, you're a racist. Now, that's silly. I'm a Catholic. I criticize the Catholic bishops. I think a lot of positions they take are silly. That doesn't in any way mean I want Catholics to be persecuted in Hungary and Romania. I don't want that. There's no connection there at all. But this is kind of a disingenuous way of trying to silence people. And believe me, there has been an effort to silence me. And by the way, the thrust of this Newsweek piece is that it's legitimate to do that.
Okay, let's go back to the beginning. I have the July American Spectator in front of me. The Nation's Pulse is the title of it, the Sobran Scandal. It leads off by saying, you wrote this. Right. Even for a journalist, I lead a pretty dull life. I'm not one of those relentless investigative chaps who get anonymous threats from husky-voiced guys on the phone telling them how many different pieces they'll wind up in if they don't lay off the big story. I've never been romantically linked with actresses in the gossip columns or arrested at an airport. I did get a parking ticket at an airport once, but I managed to keep it off the front pages, and that's the way I like it, a nice, quiet existence. And then you go on to explain one day sitting at your breakfast table opening the Wall Street Journal. What happened?
Well, that was a very minor kind of skirmish. That was a controversy about whether I should have reviewed a book by William Buckley, and I did in another conservative magazine, that one there, the American Spectator. And it wasn't so much that I gave it a favorable review, because everybody who reads the Spectator is likely to be a Buckley fan anyway, but that I try to analyze the source of Buckley's appeal for millions of people. Anyway, this kind of intersected with another controversy at the New Republic, where a book of Buckley, the same book of Buckley's, had been reviewed by a guy named Henry Fairley, who had a kind of old grudge against Buckley. And the question was raised whether it was proper for a guy who hated Buckley and was attacked in his book to review that book. And the New Republic book editor defended himself, saying, yes, that was proper. What was improper was for a staffer of Buckley's to be reviewing Buckley's book. So I wrote about that little controversy when that came up.
Okay, that's the Sobran Scandal from the July edition of the American Spectator. And back to this Newsweek piece, which was in July 7th, Jonathan Alter quotes you as saying, I will think twice before again addressing the topics that have brought on this pain. What was he talking about?
Well, the thing was that they didn't stop with attacking me. I can take that. I mean, I'm used to being abused. I know all these dirty tricks. I've been called so many names, it doesn't bother me much anymore. But then, you see, the blackmail was applied to National Review and Bill Buckley and the gang. All sorts of people were calling on Buckley to fire me.
Why?
Well, for allegedly being a bigot.
When?
Oh, about a month ago. About a month ago.
A column written in the National Review?
No, for columns I wrote on my own syndicated column.
Universal Press Syndicate?
Right, that's right.
Okay, what was the column that tripped a reaction?
Oh, there were a series of them. I've been criticizing the Israeli lobby in particular, or Israel in particular, I should say, as an unreliable ally. The spy scandals tripped it off. I started, though, before the Pollard case because I knew this was going on. That's a rather open secret. And the other day, in fact, Raphael Eitan, who's sometimes reputed to be an Israeli, how should I put it, intelligence agent in this country, was complaining in the New York Times that the American government is not handling these things discreetly anymore, that when they catch an Israeli involved in some kind of misbehavior, they go to the press with it instead of handling it quietly. And he thinks this is a breach of the rules. Well, I think the public ought to be told about this, and I think these things ought to be dealt with as harshly as necessary to stop them.
Tell us about the Midge Decter letter, and who is she?
Well, Midge Decter is the wife of Norman Podhoretz. They're two leading, quote, neoconservatives. And she wrote a letter nominally to me, actually addressed to several people who reside at my sources of income, accusing me of anti-Semitism, mostly for criticizing Israel, and for one other column in which I said that Jews are as apt to be prejudiced against Christians as vice versa, which I take to be just a basic human reality. Well, you don't talk like that. So she called me an anti-Semite and sent this letter around to I don't know how many people. Later she said she was trying to keep it private. Well, when I try to keep something private, I don't send it to innumerable editors. To me, that looked like a blacklisting and smearing operation. And there was not much point in my replying to it, except to expose it. This has become standard practice. It's part of the phenomenon of what I call alienism. That is, the attempt to make the middle American feel guilty, inhibited, ashamed, otherwise restrained in his advocacy of his own interests. You're supposed to be a defendant nowadays vis-a-vis the ethnic groups, vis-a-vis the IRS, vis-a-vis just about any kind of political power. The days that Tocqueville was celebrating are gone. We're all defendants now, and this is just one example of it. I mean, you press too hard on behalf of America's own interests, and you draw terrific fire. I can't tell you how intense it's been.
Give us an example.
Well,
give us an example of other reactions. Have you had any threats against you? Have you had a lot of letters from different groups?
Well, you can just see from your clippings the kind of attack I've got. No, I haven't had any threats yet. I wouldn't be surprised. Other people have, of course. There was the case of Alex Oda, an Arab-American Christian who was murdered last year in San Diego, I think, just after he appeared on television asserting the rights of Palestinians. Now, that doesn't happen to be my cause, justice for Palestinians, but, it's a cause. It's the sort of thing you ought to be able to advocate and argue for. He was murdered. Several other Arab-American offices in the country, in Washington and Boston, were also bombed last year, too. So there's a lot of violence. This isn't confined to one dimension. There's a lot going on here, and there are a lot of people who are afraid to talk now. I'm telling you, I've seen a lot of backstage fear, too. I mean, the kind of panic that was set off by this. I think Bill Buckley hints at it in his own statement on this case when he talks about the retaliatory powers of different groups. I think this is something that really ought to be ventilated.
In the newspaper here in Washington where your column is published from time to time, the Washington Times, they quote Dorothy Rabinowitz,
right,
who is a New York Post columnist. Ms. Rabinowitz said she has loathed Mr. Sobran since he wrote several columns supporting President Reagan's visit to the Bitburg Military Cemetery in West Germany. At that time, she telephoned Mr. Sobran to tell him in the most malevolent way that thinking like a McCarthyite primitive is what affects one's capacity as a writer. Did you talk with Dorothy Rabinowitz?
Well, she called me once last year. I didn't know she was carrying on this backstage campaign all this time that she says she has. I mean, these are her words, too. Loathed. She said she loathed me. She said she tried to tell me in the most malevolent way, and it was pretty malevolent, I'll grant her that, that she didn't like my opinions.
Let me read on. She also complained to editors of influential newspapers that subscribed to Mr. Sobran's column and to Jewish intellectuals, quote, who continue to sit on a podium with Joseph Sobran, Ms. Rabinowitz said. I told them the time will come when you will see it is wrong to give respectability to this kind of stuff. She said, this is gutter stuff. Joseph Sobran is from the gutter.
Well, she's a fine one to talk that way. I tell you, I would never use that kind of tactics against anyone. When I disagree, I say what I think. And if my views were wrong, they could have been refuted in print. That's the thing. It's when people start calling you names, it's usually because they can't answer you. When they start trying to blackball you, it's because they don't have an answer for what you have to say.
Let me switch subjects on you for a minute. I've got a July 18th National Review. This letter was written by Vincent Campanella of San Francisco, and he leads off by saying, Joseph Sobran has produced some of the magazine's best work, for example, the anniversary issue, but it is clear from his piece, Politics of Age, that he has passed judgment on an entire societal group with only partial evidence. It is unfair of Sobran to pretend that he can make an accurate and balanced reduction of most homosexuals from the licentious personal ads of freebie throwaway tabloids that, by his admission, subsist only by printing such salacious material. What's that letter all about?
Well, I wrote an article about AIDS a few months ago, in which I quoted some of the ads from the New York, some of the personal ads from the New York Native, which is the leading gay newspaper in New York. And they're pretty horrifying stuff. I mean, just advertisements for promiscuous sex. Now, it seems to me that the gay subculture is defined by promiscuity in a way that, you know, straight society isn't. Straight society could theoretically get rid of all this, you know, pornography and lechery and so forth, and still exist. But the gay subculture as we know it, I think, could not. Well, I guess that's what he's challenging. I guess he's challenging that thesis. And again, I'm willing to be proved wrong. I don't mind a letter like that. Maybe he's setting me straight. But I say how it looks to me, given what I know, what I hear, what I read. Obviously, I can't speak as authoritatively about that as some others might, but I'm not sure that those others are always giving us the complete story either.
In the July 4th issue of National Review, which looks like this on the cover, America on Course by James Jackson Kilpatrick, inside, here is a second part of a piece written by William F. Buckley. And it probably isn't fair, and we can go back and summarize some of the things he said, but at the end of this piece, Mr. Buckley says, accordingly, I disassociate myself and my colleagues from what we view as the obstinate tendentiousness, that's not right, tendentiousness of Joe Sobran's recent columns.
Yeah, well, I've been baffled by that editorial ever since he wrote it. I can only understand it as an essay on what he calls the retaliatory powers of different groups, because he doesn't quote anything tendentious in what I said. In fact, he kind of misstates my theses here and there. What's amusing, Brian, if I may take this just for a second, is that the preceding editorial ends with the sentence, neither gays nor any other group requires special protection from the give and take of democratic controversy.
This is, now, so the audience that doesn't have National Review, those are words written by the Buckley-owned magazine National Review.
Right. The preceding editorial is about free speech and special interests of this type, saying there should be complete free speech and neither gays nor any other group needs special protection from the give and take of democratic controversy. Then we go to the statement about my work, where Bill says that, indeed, Jews do need special protection, special taboos, the structure of prevailing taboos, as he calls it. Now, we don't need taboos in discussion. In behavior, yes, but not in discussion, because if you have taboos dominating a discussion, you just don't have a discussion.
Let me read the finish of Mr. Buckley's editorial. We are confident that in the weeks and months to come, he, meaning you, will charitably and rationally acknowledge the right reason behind the crystallization of the present structure of taboos, and that he will accordingly argue his positions in such fashion as to avoid affronting our national allies. Is that a statement that says you better get in line or you won't be writing for National Review anymore?
Well, I'm not too clear what it means. I don't think it means quite that, but you wonder after something like that happens, of course. I must say I'm still kind of flabbergasted by it. I mean, apparently it's all right for us to appear in Penthouse magazine, which is what Bill has done many times, but not to write genuine opinions that affront Israel. I don't get it. I mean, it makes no sense to me. There's no need for him to dissociate himself from my views because they appear under my byline in my column. I don't endorse all his views either. Life's not like that. I don't understand the kind of hysteria behind this piece.
You have been with the National Review for 13 years.
14 now.
14 years, I'm sorry. What is this, to a viewer listening, seeing a great deal of difference of opinion between you and others and also your own employer, what is your personal relationship with Bill Buckley under the circumstances?
Well, it's still pretty good. I can't pretend it's what it was. I mean, I really didn't care for this statement, but he wasn't trying to harm me. Believe it or not, he was trying to help. And the result, the upshot has been just a terrific spate of publicity about this business that wouldn't have otherwise occurred, I'm sure. One
of the things in the Newsweek piece that Jonathan Alter wrote at the end, after you said, I will think twice before again addressing the topics that have brought on this pain, Mr. Alter says, that raises the question of whether his regrets are largely tactical.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think I did anything wrong. I mean, I'm sorry if my views offend people, but they are my views, and I try to put them as gently as I can in most cases. I mean, yeah, given that I do tend to speak with a little acerbity at times, and so yeah, I'm not down on my knees crawling and begging Mr. Alter's forgiveness. I mean, he's trying to herd the non-Jews into agreement and submission, in my opinion.
What did you think of Mr. Alter's piece in Newsweek in the July 7th issue?
Well, he didn't do much reporting because he was so busy arguing with me. I thought he seemed a little bit rattled. He didn't give a very good background of the thing. He didn't even state the points very accurately. For instance, he said that I had praised Meir Kahane, the Israeli rabbi, sort of ultra, how should I put it? I don't know how to describe it. I don't want to say ultra-Orthodox because that's not quite the point. I don't think the word racist is accurate, but, you know, extremists, quote, unquote, is what he's usually called. Well, I didn't praise Kahane. I didn't attack him. That's my point. I was trying to explain his position. I don't agree with it, but I was trying to explain it, and he makes it sound as if I was praising it. So, well, of course, a lot of times when you find yourself reported on, you find about 30% of the facts are just plain wrong, even with the best intention.
Joseph Sobran is originally from Ypsilanti, Michigan. He has a degree in English from Eastern Michigan University in 1969. As we said, 14 years with the National Review here in Washington for the last 3 years. Is a senior editor of National Review, a columnist for Universal Press Syndicate, is seen often in the American Spectator and in some 80 newspapers around the country. Anybody drop your column before we take the first call?
Oh, one or two papers have, I guess.
Have lines open out west. All East Coast lines are full. Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Go ahead, please.
Yes. I have a question for Mr. Sobran. I too am a Catholic. I'm a long-time subscriber of National Review. And I have the July 4th issue before me that you just discussed. I have read it several times, and frankly, I'm mystified by Mr. Buckley's editorial. And you just discussed it a moment ago, and perhaps you could discuss it further. He says that, frankly, you are not, first, that you are not anti-Semitic.
Right.
Neither are you anti-black, anti-Italian, anti-women, or even anti-gay. So, after saying all of that, I continue to be disturbed by Mr. Buckley's conclusions, and it's not clear to me exactly what he is saying.
Caller, stay on the line if you would, please. Let Mr. Sobran respond, then you can come back and ask another question.
Yeah, that was the thing that puzzled most people, including me, that he would flatly deny that I'm a bigot in any of these senses. Well, I'll make one distinction. He says I'm not anti-gay. Well, I'm anti-homosexuality. I'm not anti-homosexuals, if you will. But anyway, because that's behavior as opposed to, quote, accident of birth. However, he says on the one hand that I'm not a bigot, and then on the other hand that it's kind of legitimate to call me a bigot. I don't really get it.
Have you followed this controversy, Hattiesburg?
Yes, I have.
What is your reaction to what you've read and what you've heard from Mr. Sobran this morning?
Well, I rather agree with Mr. Sobran. He doesn't understand Mr. Buckley's appraisal of the situation, and neither do I. And I just wonder whether the pressure that Mr. Sobran refers to that's been applied to him has been applied to Mr. Buckley, and if Mr. Buckley has submitted to it, I am really appalled.
Okay, Hattiesburg, thank you. Do you think he has submitted to it?
Well, I don't. Look, first of all, I don't think there's any great concerted Jewish conspiracy or anything like that going on here. I think there's a certain amount of panic about being seen as, being, quote, perceived as, i.e. being smeared as anti-Semitic. I mean, if you grant the legitimacy of groundless smears, then you've got to worry about groundless smears. Now, the funny thing about these kinds of accusations, O'Brien, it's worse than so-called McCarthyism in that nobody knows quite what he's being accused of. It's an ad hominem argument. It's about your motives. It's not about your actual acts. The burden of proof is on the defendant. You don't know how to clear yourself because you don't even know quite what you're answering.
Could I ask just a quick question?
Sure.
What does ad hominem mean for those who don't know?
Well, it's a personal attack on the arguer rather than an answer to the argument.
Las Cruces, New Mexico, you're next.
Yes, I'm waiting.
You're on.
Well, this gentleman from the National Review, first of all, Brian, I want to thank you for another wonderful show this morning. And I want to thank this gentleman for giving us the other side of the story, so to speak. A job well done. And it's about time that we get another opinion in this country. And if the Jewish people love Israel so much, why do we have so many of them in the United States hiding out? Are they scared to defend their country that they stole from Palestine? That's all I got to say.
Well, I don't like to get into the question of legitimacy that way. Israel is forced to answer a lot of questions about its legitimacy that other countries don't have to. Nobody asks about Syria's claim or the Soviet Union's claim to rule their territory. And I'm willing to accept any regime that's there and then to expect it to behave justly. Now, on the other part, I don't really think it's fair to demand of Jews that they go to Israel. There's some. Well, this is their country. They're American citizens. I just think that when you get a case like the Pollard case, we have a right to the full truth, and we have a right to the full truth about Israeli spying in this country, and that partisans of Israel, whether they're Jews or not, should not interfere with the disclosure of those details. I think there's a lot more going on than we've found out about so far.
Highland Park, New Jersey, you're next. Go ahead, please.
Yes, nice to talk to you, Dr. Lamb, if you remember that one. Yes, it's nice to see Mr. Sobran there. I really feel bad that he's, kind of trying to be made an object lesson by the Jewish lobby, like, they did to President Reagan on Bitburg, and how they're really going to have to hurt Walheim. I really believe they do this to keep the Holocaust and their issues up front to intimidate everybody, and I think they do very effectively. But I would like to talk about is this Israeli spying. I have yet to see any in-depth shows done on Israeli spying. It's always reported like a traffic accident. It's on one or two days. There's no kind of criticism or by anybody who really gets into it, and it's been going on probably for 20 to 30 years. This Mr. Etan, who was the handler of Mr. Pollard, the spy, he offered him $300,000. They gave him his wife a diamond ring. They had a passport made out for him. He's the same man that 18 years ago was involved in the uranium being taken from a plant in Pennsylvania, supposedly, and that is enough to make 10 nuclear bombs. So for 18-year period, this man was a member of the in the Mossad, and he's handling this one Jewish American spy in our country, and there's nobody in the whole press that can put any of these steps together and have a show on 20, 60 minutes. You know, it's just not done. And anybody does, like Mr. Sobran, right away they attack him like I read the article about Mr. Pomerantz, who told Mr. Buckley in the article that he should fire Mr. Sobran because he's anti-Semitic. And I really think this is the lowest point on our history that we can, that you're loyal to Italy, all Americans loyal to Italy, if they question it, their rights as Americans are suppressed.
Okay, Highland Park, New Jersey, let's get Mr. Sobran's reaction.
Well, that's man said a mouthful, and there's several things to respond to. I'm not sure I can recall them all. Yeah, I don't think this gets nearly enough coverage of the right kind, although there are papers that have done well, and it's best not to exaggerate the power of the Jewish lobbies. For one thing, it may give people the wrong idea about Jews in general, who I don't think should be judged by these lobbies. Second, I think what happens is a lot of editors just don't want to get into this fight. I mean, if you get into this fight, you kind of have to do it full time.
Are you tired of all this?
Oh, sure. The things I'd like to be able to write about Israel now and then, and the Mies Commission now and then, and other things now and then. But when you start getting into this, and you find you're under personal attack, you have to kind of give full time to defending yourself against really vicious attacks.
When you sit down at the typewriter, are you now intimidated about writing about this subject?
Well, in a sense, sure, absolutely. I think everyone is. An editor is going to say to himself, "I don't need this fight. You know, I've got other things to do." He's not in fear for his life. It's not terrorism in the usual sense, but it's a kind of petty terrorism where you say, well, gee, if I talk about this subject, I may have to spend the next 2 months proving I'm not an anti-Semite. Why there should be a burden of proof on an American citizen in this, I don't know. But that's the way it works. Those are the rules of the game, and the rules that I think Bill Buckley has wrongly given legitimacy to. I don't think people should have to prove their innocence. I think their arguments should be refuted for what they're worth. By the way, on the case of ITAN, the $300,000 that Pollard got could not have been part of some embassy slush fund. Nobody has that kind of money to throw around, as far as I know. To me, the interesting thing about the Pollard case that still hasn't been addressed is this. They've named about 5 chiefs, and Pollard is about the only Indian. Now, it seems to me if there's that big an operation going on, there have got to be more agents in the field than Pollard.
Portland, Oregon, next for Joseph Sobran. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. By the way, on ad hominem, I think we really ought to tease this out a little bit because it does have a lot to do with discourse in this country. Ad hominem means in Latin of or pertaining to a human being. And what it refers to is the source of an argument. For instance, an argument from authority is also an argument ad hominem.
Right.
Okay, so if the Pope says birth control is bad for this or that reason, okay, the response to that is saying the Pope is the Pope, therefore the Pope is right, is an argument ad hominem. And of course the response, play it a game, make it a rules, is the statement that the Pope should have nothing to say about birth control because he's not in the game of procreation. You see, so that's also ad hominem. If I call Mr. Sobran a creep, that's a personal attack. If I say the arguments that Mr. Sobran proposes are wrong because Mr. Sobran is a creep, that's an argument ad hominem. It's bearing on the truth of an argument more than anything else.
Right.
And I've bring it up basically because there's a lot of name-calling goes on in public discourse nowadays.
Yeah.
And implicit in it is always an argument ad hominem. As Mr. Sobran said, it's got nothing to do with the truth or falsehood of cases being made. On the other hand, you can engage in personal attacks legitimately when all a person does is engage in characterization or name-calling, because those are essentially aesthetic responses, not arguments. And we don't get enough arguments nowadays. We get far too much name-calling. And so the whole thing turns into a welter of, back and forth and discourse. I've been seriously inhibited in this country on all kinds of things, not just this.
Okay, thank you, Portland. What's your reaction?
Oh, I agree.
That's it?
Not much to add. That's very eloquent.
Orlando, Florida, next. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I have read at least one of Mr. Sobran's articles, the one in particular, The Politics of AIDS. And I felt it was intellectually incisive and accurate and supports my own view of that subculture. And I felt a great sense of relief that at least somebody was dealing with this issue in a more complete way than I had before been associated with, or at least read about.
Thank you.
In regards to the Bill Buckley editorial, I felt that what he was saying in the final paragraph was that the only thing that Joe was guilty of was maybe doing something against his own best interests as opposed to being anti-Semitic. And that's really all I had to say. I fully support Mr. Sobran and look forward to some of his future work. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Any other response?
Well, I think Bill does think that this is against my best interests, but on the other hand, I'm really the reason I write is because I like to say what I think. It's not something you get all that stinking rich at, and so if the work itself isn't satisfying, there's no point in doing it for a living. So I like to really think things through and reach conclusions that may be socially heterodox, even if they're not intrinsically outrageous, shall we say.
Based on your response for a couple of calls ago, can we say then that if you are intimidated about writing about this, then the people who have attacked you have been successful?
To some extent, yeah. I mean, I'll be back. I'm not going away. As long as I'm permitted to write anywhere, I'll say what I think. It's just that you do think twice. And yet you've got to tell yourself, it's a little like what Ted Williams said after he got beaned one time. He had to get back in the batter's box and grit his teeth and get ready for the next pitch, because he would have been no good if he'd been preoccupied with getting hit again.
The hearings for the new Chief Justice, William Rehnquist designate, Chief Justice designate, will be on Tuesday, a week from tomorrow, and possibly Wednesday if another day is needed. The hearings for Judge Scalia to be the next Supreme Court Justice will be the week following on Tuesday and Wednesday, and we'll cover those here either live or on tape, depending on whether the House and Senate's in session. The Senate and House back today. Let's go next to Gainesville, Florida. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. I'd like first to thank CSPAN. I'm a Lebanese Christian. When I was in Lebanon, I wasn't very much proud of the PLO, what they did in Lebanon. But when I came to the States, I was really surprised by the coverage about what's going on in Lebanon, especially related to the Palestinians. For example, when there's any terrorist act, it said directed as a terrorist act. But when Israel bombed the Palestinian camp, it's always bombing terrorist places where I know very well they're not only terrorists. There's some Palestinian fighters, but there's also family, women and children. And besides, there is always kind of, when you're not in that state, whenever you speak your mind, I criticize, for example, the Lebanese Christian, my own party, defends all the stuff when I do something wrong. And when I do something right, I said this is right. But here, if you say your mind, if it's good for whatever Israel did good and bad whatever it did bad, you always remember it for what Israel did bad and never said, the it's not something that happened and quickly. It goes from one person to another, and then after a few days, everybody knows what you said about this, about that. And I'd like if Mr. Sobran can speak about this point, especially for us Arab, even if we're Christian, if we don't like what the PLO did in that certain area, and we don't like the Israeli, what they do in certain area, why isn't as democracy as it should be? Thank you.
Thank you, Gainesville. Did you understand?
I'm sorry, I kind of missed the tail end of the question.
Respond to what he was saying earlier then.
Well, yeah, we do have different. I mean, we don't describe the bombing of these centers as terrorist acts, and often more innocent people are killed in these bombings than were killed in the acts that they're purportedly responding to. It took me a long time to realize this. I was in Rome a few years ago, and I was sitting at a sidewalk cafe with. There was another fellow at the next table, and we struck up a conversation, and he was Lebanese. And we got talking, and I told him I'd never been to Lebanon. It sounded like a lovely country. I was sorry about all the things that were happening there. This was in '82, before the war, before the big war that year. And he was a very kindly, gentle old man, a rug or clothing merchant who was in Rome on business, and he said something about the Israelis and their bombing missions, and just shook his head. And somehow it was the way he shook his head that impressed me. He wasn't giving a diatribe against the Zionist entity. There was none of that kind of ideological bitterness in him. It was just a very human sadness, a kind of despair that anyone would listen to him. And it touched me in a certain way, and I didn't change my mind right away, and I don't know that I've completely changed my mind. It wasn't that kind of thing, but I give much more weight to these matters than I used to. It used to be newspaper headlines, and here I knew a man who'd been, in some sense, under those bombs.
Joseph Sobran, originally from Ypsilanti, Michigan, senior editor of the National Review, nationally syndicated columnist. Next, Jacksonville. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. I'd like to talk about the fact that national papers won't put anything on about Israel, but little weeklies sometimes do. I've got an article here in front of me from the Jackson Herald of Ripley, West Virginia, zip 25271. I'd like to read 3 short paragraphs of it. It's headed Brown Trip Paid by Israel. Attorney General Charlie Brown told Jackson Herald on Friday that no taxpayers' money was used for his trip to Israel. Brown said he paid for the airfare from Charleston to New York and that the government of Israel picked up the tab for the rest of the week-long tour he returned from 10 days ago. Brown said 4 or 5 attorney generals made the trip. He added that the government of Israel sponsors the tour each year, and he was chosen to go this year from the National Association of Attorney Generals. When asked why Israel sponsors this sojourn annually, Brown said it is probably because so many attorney generals eventually become U.S. senators or governors or assume other positions that could be beneficial to Israel. This is sort of a strange way of spending our loan money to Israel, is it?
Mr. Sobran?
Well, it's hard to do cost accounting on that. I don't know that it's our loan money in particular, but I've often wondered how much of that aid money does come back to us in the form of these kinds of public relations efforts. But I don't know. I can't really say much about that.
You might pass on, Joe Sobran, to our audience the fact that in this morning's Wall Street Journal, on the front page by Edward Pound and Dave Rogers, first of a series of articles, Pulling Strings, Savvy Lobbyists Gain Clout in Washington for Foreign Clients. Critics say pro-business tone of administration helps power brokers to flourish. Mr. Timmons, that's Bill Timmons, Tokyo Links, and that's the first of a series. Too much of this going on?
Yes. I mean, we've come a long way from the kind of government that the framers of the Constitution envisaged. They had government by discussion in mind, not government by bribery, by influence, peddling, by lobbying, and all that sort of thing. They really hoped for some kind of meeting of rational minds, of civic-minded men, sitting down and discussing what was for the country's welfare. And we now take for granted that that's not the way our system works. Well, we ought to be ashamed.
For Joe Sobran, Port Neches, Texas. Go ahead, please.
Brian, I'm sure glad. Let me turn my TV down a little.
All right, sir. Talking with Joe Sobran, nationally syndicated columnist, and our caller is turning his television set down. Go ahead, sir. Are you on the line, sir?
How's that, Brian? Is that better?
That's fine. Go ahead, please.
I'm in Port Neches, Texas, Brian, and I wrote you a letter and did hear from you. I'm really interested in C-SPAN. I'm a retired school teacher, and I've had a few other businesses going, and I'm from Texas. First, I want to tell that old boy with you, I'm glad he's on. I got a brother-in-law that's a Jew, and he's up he takes care of my sister's kids, and my sister's a Jew now since she married him, but we get along fine. But I know we lean over backwards to help the Jews out, and I guess they're helping us out. I hope so. If they're not, we invest a hell of a lot of money for nothing. I want to ask this question that John was talking with you. Don't back down, son, because I worked in public schools for 35 years and never made over $5 an hour, but I'm retired and in good shape. I don't give a damn what the oil prices do. If they can't handle that in Austin, Texas, and save some of the money, they deserve to lose something, and that's what's happening. And the public schools are on their last leg, tell you the truth. I want him to offer an opinion on that. No, we got every church in this area has a gymnasium and 15, 20 classrooms. People don't know it. They haven't woke up to the fact that education is costing too damn much, not only in Texas, but other places too. I was chairman of the Blue Lodge for 25 years on public school education, which was to let the public know that we own the schools, not Washington and not Austin, Texas. And we're about to lose them because they're costing too damn much.
Caller, where's your town located?
I'm right on the Beaumont, Port Arthur area. We haven't got about 250,000 population, Brian, but I've never voted for my candidate since I come down here. This is the strongest union area in the state of Texas. They're slacking off a little bit now, Brian. Of course, you know that.
Okay, thanks for the call. I'm sorry we didn't get that letter back to you. Sometimes there's too many to get back. But Joe Sobran, what's your response?
To what?
The education question.
Oh, I didn't know it was a question. Well, I would like to see a lot more diversity in education. In fact, my ideal would be to see no public education at all. I think that's a mistake.
Chattanooga for Joe Sobran. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I was calling. I am glad to see that someone can see both sides of an issue as regards Lebanon and Palestine and Israel. As far as sympathy for the Jews go, I have an awful lot. The Holocaust was a horrible thing. I'd hate to see something like that happen again. But it seems to me the way they react is almost as vicious sometimes as the Palestine reaction is too. That was really all I had to say, is that I'm glad someone can see both sides of an issue.
Thank you, Chattanooga.
Thank you, ma'am. But again, I think we have to be very careful to distinguish between the Jewish people in general and the Jewish lobbies. One thing about all this hysteria about anti-Semitism that amazes me. On the one hand, we're always told that anti-Semitism is something that's completely irrational and implausible and has no appeal to any sane or decent person. Okay, good. On the other hand, we're supposed to behave as if it's possible that there will be a sudden outbreak of this irrationality all over the country all at once if somebody tells an ethnic joke or criticizes an ethnic lobby. Well, you can't have it both ways. I mean, I really do think the country is pretty... this is a decent country. Most people are sane and stable. The conditions of Nazi Germany don't exist here, and I just don't think that there's any reason for us to be always intimidated by this possibility. It's so remote. There's so many other things that could happen.
She mentioned the Holocaust, and I want to read a little bit from Alexander Coburn's column in The Nation magazine of the date July 5th, and 12th, 1986. You'll recall from my column, Mr. Coburn says, here of June 7th, that Sobran, one of the columnists for Buckley's National Review, had spoken in the highest terms of Instauration, I-N-S-T-A-U-R-A-T-I-O-N, a racist publication which had spoken warmly of Sobran. Instauration is anti-Semitic, calling the Holy Hoax a gigantic Hebe soap opera, and has said there will be no black progress until someone tells us how you can get inside jeans and do a little redesigning. Here's the final sentence. Sobran wrote that Instauration is, quote, an often brilliant magazine covering a beat nobody else will touch, and doing so with intelligence, wide-ranging observation, and bitter wit.
Well, Coburn's up to old tricks there. The reason he writes for The Nation rather than the Village Voice is his failure to disclose information. Here he doesn't mention, he says I spoke in the highest terms of this magazine. I did not. I gave it credit for certain things, because I do read a lot of things I disagree with, and I extract things from them that I can use. But I was writing a column arguing with Instauration's approach. Instauration did a nice, flattering piece on me. They do a lot of civilized sorts of pieces, along with a lot of very ugly pieces. And they did a piece on me as a defender of the American majority. Well, I'm glad to be that, but that doesn't mean I'm a racist or that I endorse their racism.
Where can you buy Instauration?
Oh, I don't know.
Is it a mail order?
Somebody sent me a subscription. It's sort of obscure. I think it's located in Florida somewhere.
Do you know who owns it or who runs it?
No. Well, there's a guy. The editor's name is Wilmot Robertson, and I guess that's a pseudonym. At any rate, he puts this thing out once a month, and it has a lot of sharp observations in it, even though it's also got a lot of, very ugly, insulting kinds of things in too. I think, though, that, I don't read it for that kind of stuff, and I think that the things he's quoting there probably came from the letters to the editor column, not from the articles. Because it's not that, it doesn't maintain that kind of tone, or there wouldn't be anything in it worth reading.
Tulsa, Oklahoma, for Joe Sobran. Go ahead, please.
Right. Brian, I'd like to compliment you. I think it's a very fine thing you didn't have this gentleman on. Your C-SPAN, I think, is probably the most important signal that reaches the public anywhere in the United States. And my feeling has been that you only do about 30% of what you should do, largely because you don't have enough of this kind of man on the program. Joe, I'd like to say to you that don't soften your tone, sharpen them. The idea of watching C-SPAN, congressmen and other public officials talking to somebody who are in direct opposite to them in polite and gentlemanly terms, I think is more than the public can tolerate. We don't have enough people who will stand up and say what needs to be said. I think you've got a great future. I kind of hope Buckley fires you and Brian will give you a job, because the first communications media that allows the American people to see that there is a very solid and substantial point of view coming from where you stand that's not being heard in this country. I think it's very, very important what you're doing.
Well, that suggests to me an important thought. See, I think a lot of people get the wrong impression, and I had it too before I was in the media myself. You get the impression that there's a big conspiracy. Well, there isn't. What there is a kind of very suffocating etiquette. And people are voluntarily observing a lot of conventions that they don't have to observe and that do stifle the truth. For example, I think that's just what Bill Buckley's done. I think he's going to give the naive reader the impression that he's under terrific pressure from Jews. Well, he's not. He's under terrific internal pressure. He thinks he has to maintain a certain kind of appearance that he really doesn't have to. I mean, he does not bear any malice toward Jews. I know that. He does not have to worry about appearing to. If he criticizes the Jewish lobbies and Jewish interests of various kinds, he can afford that. And we all ought to be more candid about it. Because, believe me, you just can't scare up enough people for a Nazi party in this country. It's not there. The potentiality isn't there. Let's stop worrying about each other, feeling guilty about the Holocaust, and trying to avoid something that nobody has any intention of doing.
Has he personally talked to you physically about this thing?
Oh, yeah, sure. And, you know, I mean, he was very fatherly about it, very nice. He's a very sweet man. And he was worried about my future more than anything. I think at some point after that talk, before he wrote this, he got to the point where he was worried about the magazine, too. He doesn't have to worry. We don't have to worry. Let's be polite and civil and all that, but let's not pull our punches because we're afraid that it's going to cause some gigantic racial conflagration. It's not going to happen.
Parochial matter in the New York Times this morning, subject that we talk about a lot, on stage in Senate, where TV sees all, and this is a piece by Robin Toner. It talks about Bob Dole, the Senate Republican leader, and possible Republican presidential contender, is considered an early winner. So far, his image on Senate television has been one of skillful leadership, many political observers or experts say. Senator Joseph Biden, a possible Democratic presidential aspirant, demonstrated his telegenic potential in a passionate argument against the judicial nomination of Daniel Mannion. Mr. Biden, a noteworthy speaker, is expected to thrive on the Senate's airwaves. This will continue to be discussed, Joe Sobran, in the next couple of days. They're going to decide whether or not to continue television in the Senate. Do you have any doubt?
Well, I think we're getting more and more toward a hammy kind of politics. I mean, the good old days are long gone, the days when, well, I don't know if that vision wasn't even the most utopian of all that the framers had of government by discussion. And yet we still have a certain amount of it. But we get more and more government by sensation rather than discussion.
Palmyra, New Jersey. Go ahead, please.
I found your show up to date very interesting. I just want to tell you that I am a Jew, and I am not a Zionist. And I want that point to be made that everyone who considers himself a Jew does not consider himself a Zionist. There are many Zionists who are not Jews. Some of the diatribes of Pat Robertson certainly sound Zionistic, and I don't think Reverend Pat Robertson is considered Jewish. Zionism was a political and social thing that came up only in the late 1800s, and there are many of us who do not believe that the state of Israel is Eretz Israel in a biblical sense. I think that the place for Jews or blacks or Christians or what have you is anywhere they wish to reasonably settle and exchange freely with others, and not to be isolated and sent to a particular place. I think the Marcus Garvey concept was an unfortunate form of black Zionism, that the only place for blacks was back in Africa. The only place, for a Jew is back in Israel. If Zionism had been totally successful in the 30s, and all Jews had gone back to Israel, by the 40s, the Germans would have annihilated them because they would have all been in one area. I can't help but believe that, some white-hooded people who sit at their little cross-burning meetings would love to have a black Zionism, to have all blacks believe they should go back, or all Irish, or all Catholics, or all Jews, and then in one spot, and then they could sit around and say, boy, after we get them in one spot, we'll get rid of them, because all holocaustic type of ideals need a final resting place for the final solution that these people have. One other thing that I'd like to say is that I'm not surprised at Mr. Buckley's response. I used to read National Review many years ago. I don't anymore, and haven't for a number of years, because he's not a libertarian. He's a confused conservative, and because of that, I don't think he has a philosophy that he can interpret specific events with very well. The other thing is that I hope that Mr. Sobran has an opportunity to address another subject that we don't like to talk about, and that is, especially here in the Philadelphia area, about the problems we're having with government. And I can't see that any of our structural problems in this country are going to be solved until we do the following, and that is that limit all political office to one term only, and remove the right to vote on tax issues by tax receivers. There's only two classes now in the country, taxpayers and tax receivers.
Caller, I'm running out of time. Thank you for your point, but I want to let Mr. Sobran respond, and we've got another call before we end the show.
Okay, the last proposal is very interesting. Anyone who gets government money shouldn't vote. I think there's a clear conflict of interest. Anytime you get a dollar from other people's earnings, you should forfeit your right to vote.
Warminster, Pennsylvania. Last call. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. Touche on C-SPAN. I've been watching it for about a year and consider America's lobbyists. It's our only avenue to get public opinion out and compete.
Thank you. We've only got a minute, sir. Please respond to...
I'd just like to make a brief comment and possibly a question. At what point do you draw the line and stop dwelling on the past in many issues and start hearing about issues on the future? We hear constantly the Holocaust. We hear the black issues, the slavery issues. And every ethnic group has their horrendous past. But very little is ever put out or dealt with on what these areas or these groups want to do in the future.
Okay, we'll end it there, please.
Well, I'm all for commemoration of things, so that we're reminded that they happen and all that. I'm not for manipulating people by the use of guilt. I don't want my children to be made to feel guilty for things they didn't do, any more than I feel guilty for things I didn't do. I really hate bitterly that whole approach to public issues.
Has this issue created strange bedfellows? You find people that you normally disagree with on other subjects that have come to your aid at all?
Yeah, I have. In fact, I've had some of my strongest support from Jews. Jews who are very critical of Israel, not necessarily anti-Zionist Jews, but Jews who know what's what and don't like to be, quote, represented by the lobbies that we're all familiar with.
Joseph Sobran, our guest for the last 60 minutes, originally from Ypsilanti, Michigan. His degree in English from Eastern Michigan University in 1969, a syndicated columnist at Universal Press Syndicate, and senior editor of National Review. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Brian.
To our audience, have a nice day.
If you'd like more information about this or any other C-SPAN program, please feel free to write to us at 400 North Capitol Street Northwest, Washington, D.C. 20001.